past is never dead. It's not even past. That's William Faulkner. You know, it happens all the time. You know, it happened to me this morning. I looked down my southern window into the sky next to the World Trade Center, and I saw the empty sky. The empty sky to the east of it has the echo of the original World Trade Center, and it often has that echo for me. So the past isn't past. I was recently in Oaxaca, and there are Zapotec ruins outside of Oaxaca. But they were hidden for centuries and centuries under a mountain, Montalban. A mountain that looked like any other mountain until somebody discovered a piece of pottery. And then the earth was moved. And suddenly, an entire civilization became apparent. And suddenly, the entire world shifted. And there are still mountains that are just mountains nearby in Montalban. But everybody knows that under that hidden soil, there are temples, there are homes, there are people who are like hidden shadows, like shadows that are just barely seeable, the past that's a living present, that's changing the experience of people in Oaxaca, and changing the experience of the living moment of Mexico and Mexicans in Oaxaca. And we, the New York Institute, I as a member of the New York Institute, am a person in time, I'm a person in history. And this is a theme that has intrigued me as a member of this institute and as a person for a long, long time. This is how I have constructed myself, my personhood, at this institute and in the world, both as a matter of experience, as a matter of Gestalt therapy, and as a general stance intellectually and philosophically. And that has brought me over time, sensitized me over time to the kinds of questions that I've been asking and continuing to ask, and I'm continuing to ask here with you. Jesus. Please take your pulse. Have better luck than I'm having. Let's see if you can locate it. Take a breath, if you will. And as I'm doing, I'm breathing into my pulse and settling myself into this chair and looking around. Settling myself with you. If you're willing, we have yet one more go around and just simply say where you are, however you want to say it, and include whatever you like to say, briefly. I'll begin. I am here with my pulse beating in this room with people I know, I have known, and know less well. With my face warm, my heart beating. I know this space and I don't know this space. I feel warm and such a sadness.
feel calm and warm and pleasant.
I'm settling in. Curious and breathing easily.
I feel warm and pulsing like my pulse.
Happy and sad and grateful to be alive.
Here, curious, and I know who I am and I don't know who I am.
Feeling my pulse and feeling my body in the room with everybody, and noticing my mind wanting to make sure that I'm following along and making sense of things.
I'm feeling a sense of responsibility and distraction due to technical issues. Including dying of a battery. And now I'm embarrassed that I'll have to make some noise to replace the battery. Forgive me.
Feeling tired from rushing over the last 3 or 4 hours as I came in from upstate New York.
And the wall was what said. I try to calm down, but for now I can't. I don't know why exciting. I am excited.
Even though I have no pulse, I'm feeling animated and lively, and looking around, seeing a lot of people that I love, so I'm very touched.
Took me a while, but I did find my pulse. I'm here. And I'm here with everyone that's here. And I'm here with everyone that's not here. And then Montalban, how that, I love what you said, Dan, about how it animates the people in Oaxaca, makes them who they are. And we walked over here and we're in this building. What this building was, who was here before this building, what this neighborhood was, and what it was before that. And what will be here after us. That helps me be here.
Well, I found it a little creepy and scary to try to find my own pulse. And I did find it, so I'm glad to have one, and I'm glad all of you do.
I feel grounded and I can feel my breath, so I'm feeling good.
I have my pulse and it feels sort of faint and calming in a way. And with Dan, there's a sense of distance about it between, let's say, my heart, my feelings, and my body. And I'm also thinking about Mexico and waiting for a train in Valladolid. And I guess you primed that inside of me. the distance and a distant memory that I hold.
I'm still feeling my pulse. It's very sweet to feel alive, and notice feeling also connected to myself and everyone in the room in a different way. And I have a deep appreciation and gratitude for the opportunity to be here, and also a sense of timelessness, that the past and the present and the future are all one.
I guess I should get in the video. I was actually trying to figure out my time signature, my pulse, like, musically, and it's about an 8/8 right now. Boom, 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 boom.
Mine's still Latin.
It's lacking.
Latin.
Oh, Latin.
Latin rhythm.
I'm wondering if we could move in and make the circle smaller, because I have trouble hearing most everybody really clearly. I don't know if that.
It gets cooler in the room.
Yes, I will eventually move.
Let people move
But
as
not
they
at
feel
this
moved.
moment.
Let people moving as you feel moved. I like it, things to go around and then we kind of address something relevant to what you just raised. Because as an annoying patient once said, let's put a pin in that.
Rachel Maddow,
Did she do that?
all the time.
Like,
Does work.
This is a beautiful start to a presentation, to our being together. And your words, always poetic, particularly, I am particularly feeling that. So what I feel when I'm in a group that's starting or having beauty is I feel vulnerable. And that's how I feel right now. And my usual response to feeling vulnerable is to be angry. It's my way of fighting back feeling vulnerable. So that's what I'm able to report right now. I was able to feel my pulse. I did not like being asked to look for my pulse. Felt too personal. And I'm settling in, and those are my first comments. I know that all of that will change for me because I'm already used to that structure in myself.
For me, lately, well, like the past 4 years, I not only can touch or feel my pulse, but I can see it. So it's boop, 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 you can.
I won't be able to see
Okay.
I regret.
So it made me nervous at the beginning, but then when I started feeling it, just like Barry, it calmed me down a little bit. So it was interesting for me to use it this way. So I'm feeling calm and interesting. Everybody's response.
So, did you hear me okay?
I heard you
fine, thank you.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'd like to stay where I am. I
Yes.
don't mean to be offensive.
No.
Okay.
And I apologize, in that, kind of silence, I was thinking we were done, or I wouldn't have come in, so I'm sorry that I actually interrupted you.
I would also like, I feel open from all of this. My chest feels open, and I feel expanded, and that's a kind of version of what you said about being vulnerable with, and supported by this and this and this, actually. What?
Diana hasn't given her report.
She did.
You did?
She
Yes.
did.
Oh, I didn't realize that was it.
It was it.
I want to also suggest and ask people to pay attention to your sense of the space here as we proceed. And as I've asked you to pay attention to your heartbeat, I had a couple of reasons for that. I mean, probably more reasons than I can even identify, which is great. One was to pay attention to your personal time. One was to immediately ground yourself in your own experienced bodily presence. I mean both simultaneously, including any sense of personal intrusion, for which I'm not apologizing, but I'm acknowledging that I was asking you to do something that personal, and getting in touch with whatever that meant for you. And also I may be asking you again to pay attention to our time together, because we are going to proceed, whether we pay attention to it or not, with our own particular pulse. And I'm also aware that because of the structure of this event, I am going to be interrupting it, because this is a 3-ring circus in one ring. And maybe a 15-ring circus in one ring, since I tend to have a certain amount of energy. So let me get something out of the way immediately. That and that. I was the theme, skulls and skeletons. You know, as I said, this is not going to be about ghosts and goblins, except insofar as we already conjured ghosts, skulls and skeletons. I was invited to teach and lecture in Mexico City, and I chose a date which seemed great because it was going to be close to the celebration of the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Now, if you've seen the movie Coco, which I had just seen, you know how really quite wonderful that celebration is. And it is a celebration that has its roots in the pre-Hispanic Mexico, and it is brought into the present in current Mexican culture. And it's not something that is only what we do at Halloween, but it's something that is taken quite personally among the Mexicans. And I was invited into people's homes and seeing how they celebrate it in their homes. People have an altar, an ofrenda, an offering in their own home, where they have a photograph of their dead relatives, and they put in front of the dead relatives something that's special to that relative. They have an offering of food that the person liked, objects that were special to the person, and they bring the memory of that person into the present and they celebrate. It's not an object of mourning, it's an object of making present the past in the living present. So there you have it, that skull with something alive growing out of it. And on the Day of the Dead, a lot of Mexicans go to their cemetery and they, as you've seen Coco, and I highly recommend it, actually celebrate the Day of the Dead. And there are those beautiful, what we call marigolds, all over the place. It's really quite a celebration. So I took that opportunity to see what I could do with Gestalt therapy in terms of the Day of the Dead. And my own particular interest in Gestalt therapy, as it has morphed over my time as a Gestalt therapist, has been in terms of, how do I put this? Our cultural world. What is it? How did I put it here when I wrote it? It sounds a little bit more provocative. what is there about the meeting of my particular world with the Mexican world that can Gestalt therapy say something about? Or what can Gestalt therapy say about this meeting of two cultures? What can we reveal about human beings gestalted in this meeting of these two cultures, mine and the Mexican culture, in the day of the dead? Now, I believe in Gestalt therapy principally as a clinical phenomenology. I've written a fair amount about that. I also approach Gestalt therapy, and some of you may know this, as an iconoclast. I've inherited some of this from some of our people at the Institute. I have challenged all of our assumptions. Everything that I was taught, everything with an asterisk, everything that I was taught as bedrock Gestalt therapy, I've come to question over time. And I've come to ask, how, pick an object, I shake it, I bang it, I rattle it. What's inside of this idea? Just how accurate does this describe experience? Because after all, Gestalt therapy isn't ideas. Gestalt therapy is a way of addressing, coming towards experience. It's experience that's teaching us. We're not teaching experience. We're not putting theory on experience. Our theory is chasing experience. And the thing about language and ideas is it's always trying to catch up with experience, and we never can catch experience. We're always speaking about and thinking towards, but we never hold on to it. We can't do that because we're always an object in motion. We're always process. Everything moves. Remember Galileo said that? It moves. He whispered it when he was in his what do you call it, in his heresy trial for the Pope. It moves. Everything moves. As Ruella will tell us, always, it moves. It can't otherwise than move. Experience moves. That is our job as Gestalt therapists. We pay attention to anything that seems like it doesn't move. So experience moves, our ideas move, our theory has to move. So what are our basic principles? One after another. I challenge them, I ask, do they still make sense? Do they still match our clinical experience? Do they still match our being in this world? Do they still make sense in terms of our world? First, have they made sense in terms of the world of our founders? Do they make sense in terms of the world the decades later? And let's continue to go back and forth. So that's been my approach in Gestalt therapy. And I don't say that I found answers. What I say is I found questions. And when I think I found an answer, I question my answer. I've also discovered when I broke out of this world, and I'm using world particularly, when I broke out of this world, and I mean this world of the New York Institute, and I mean this world of the New York Institute historically as one that teaches the PhD principally, and principally as the theory of Gestalt therapy in English. When I broke out of it and interacted with people who've learned Gestalt therapy and even PhD in translation, I've learned that there are other ideas that can be released from within our theory when our theory has been translated into other languages. So I've learned more about Gestalt therapy through my interaction with people who've learned Gestalt therapy in Italian, learned Gestalt therapy in German, studied Gestalt therapy in Spanish. So in my conversations, things have opened up. And that was something that happened in the last 10, 15 years. So that also has given me a sense of release. And I'm urging that on all of us to consider Gestalt therapy and releasing, as always releasing as we come to understand it. And that has happened with my understanding of the theory of self, things like that. And it doesn't belong to any particular language. Gestalt therapy belongs to the place between languages. And the Gestalt therapy belongs in the space for interaction, and it belongs as all good ideas do, belong in the space between our understanding as we're reaching for more understanding. This we've learned through phenomenology, and this we can learn through our own common sense when we let go of what we're so sure about. And danger I had is that people think that I'm so sure of myself, because I tend to speak in declarative sentences. It's hard to do otherwise. I do. So this is kind of a preface about what I'm going to say, because what I'm about to say will sound pretty confident. It's not my fault. But what I'm going to do is challenge some of the basic ideas of Gestalt therapy in order to tickle out what I think are implied in our orientation and what are necessary for us to regroup, reconfigure our posture towards the living present, toward what I like to think of as the aesthetics of the present, in order to release the Zapotec civilization under Montalban, to release those layered histories in the streets of New York, and actually to find the people who are here but not here, as we know them. So what am I going to do? And this time you may find that I've what I'm going to say is unlike many of my presentations where I have 10 hours of presentation, you may find that my ideas are very simple and you have left a lot of time for discussion. I may find that. So, I'm going to look at, as I said, as the present as a place of cemeteries. And that brings in the idea of what do you call it? The skeleton. I'm going to introduce two big ideas. Do I have them as two, or is it really one? Is it one or two? And I'm going to introduce them by looking closely at a bedrock part of our catechism. Think of like everybody. What's the bedrock part of our catechism? Everybody's going to think of a different part of the Hail Mary. I'm not going to even ask. I don't because I don't want to even know. Just think for a second. What do you think I'm going to say? This is the thing where he makes these assumptions. The organism environment field. This is pretty much, you look through all of the check the box. Everybody learns this in Gestalt therapy, and it is very much the basic concept of Gestalt therapy from the very beginning, and it is much of our practice, theory, and orientation towards the world in our epistemology and if you want, maybe even ontology, but that's twists arms to get there, is it based upon the organism environment field, however you want to look at field, and people are going to war on what field means. I am not going to war on what field means. So the organism environment field is clearly described in Pearls, Hefferlein, and Goodman, and clearly described in many, many different places and in many slightly different ways. I am not going to challenge the organism environment field in its entirety, but I do challenge whether or not it really matches up with the phenomenology of Gestalt therapy as a clinical phenomenology. Now, why again do I care about Gestalt therapy as a clinical phenomenology? Because that is where we live. We live in a world of experience, and we practice in a world of experience. We may be making assumptions, and we may be predicating our practice on other things, other abstractions, and other conditions, such as, let's say, neuroscience, such as, not incorrect, such as medicine, such as biology. But in terms of the direct experience of our practice, our experience is in terms of the first-person experience in our clinical setting. This is the clinical phenomenology of Gestalt therapy. If we are clinical phenomenologists, this is what appears to us and shows itself in our therapy session, and this is the nature of our presence in the aesthetic of contact. And if you have questions about any of this, I'm open to this is part of our discussion. This is an assumption I'm making. And in terms of our work, I'm suggesting to you that the simple organism environment field model becomes blank in terms of meaning. Now how? It comes blank, it's fine in terms of organisms. My mouth is a little dry now. Let me call that the making present of something that's organismic. I think that's a fair assumption. I'll take some water. No, club soda. I've already gone into an abstraction. But it's phenomenologically justifiable. But what about environment? When I summon up my experience of environment, I am not entirely confident that that word accounts for what I'm experiencing in this room with you now. I know that in much of the literature, environment includes a lot of things that could account for this. But I'm suggesting that it doesn't. It doesn't really include my experience of my actual living in the world. It doesn't include my experience of how time passes, my experience of time. It doesn't include my experience of space. It doesn't include what is humanly vital to me. Is that a gesture of
question?
Okay, I was trying to interpret that.
Because I hear what you're saying, and I just wanted to relate it to your recent example. I agree with what you just said. The environment has nothing to do with that, your experience internally. Except for that, when we perceive something in our mouth, or the chair we sit on, or whatever, that's the perception of the environment.
Well, I'll get into that, but it's
not an experience of the environment.
What?
It's not an experience of the environment. It's your experience.
Well, yeah, you've gotten to, yeah, it's more than that and less than that. It's more and less than that, but I'm gonna get into that, and it's what I want to do is I want you to grant me. I want you to hold that excellent question on the detail of the organism environment field. And specifically, let me just do this. Just drive some people crazy. And, okay. Organism, let's call it all organism. All right. Let's call this the meaning of the organism environment. Everybody comfortable with that slash?
No.
Why?
It's this. For me, it's this. There's no slash.
For me, that looks like between rather than a through.
Right.
And the slash to me means that it's a polarity. One doesn't exist without the other. And the way you described it was a little different. Kind of lapsed into a duality.
But it isn't. It's not.
And they're really a unity.
Yeah, how about organism?
How about along a spiral?
No, because it's one whole.
How about an arrow with two vectors?
Okay, Right, you know, I could get more into this, and I was afraid I didn't want to. I was hoping that would be, you'd say, okay. 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 I guess this is not my point. Okay, let me tell you where I'm going. Let me just say it outright. I want to talk about the organism environment field as a field of space and a field of time. And grant me that this slash is the place of meeting, and it does not divide, but experience emerges of this location, and that it is this represents a specific location, a phenomenal location that is of the organism and environment, not organism, not environment, but of this location, and it is of one whole dynamic location that is only has its phenomenal existence, if that could be said, experiential existence because of its meeting. And at the same time, which goes to your point, Frank, at the same time it is biophysical, right? Biophysical, because the environment, we were warm, right? We're warm is a measure of temperature, and temperature is a measure of the environment. So it's biophysical, and at the same time it's experiential. Now we can be warm, have the experience of being warm when the room is cold. Now what's that about, all right? So there's also an experiential, experience of the function of this. So that's where I'm saying that. And we can get into an argument. That's why I said there's trouble between whether it's a dash or a slash. And that's, I leave that to copy editors.
It's
And the people who are more obsessive than I am, and there are.
But I believe they call it the living environment. There's organism, and then there's the environment. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a lot of metaphors for it.
And there are a lot of terms in biology, like Umwelt, Mitwelt, Eigenwelt, all that stuff. All right, so where I'm going is towards the. And this is, why is this so important in terms of skulls and skeletons and the living present? Is I'm trying to suggest to you that, is this where we bury our dead in the environment? Is this where the past is made present in the environment? Does this explain this adequately? Now, sure. Can we find a way in Gestalt therapy to with our own glorious theory, with a glorious theory, expand our approach to address this in terms of contacting and in terms of the sequence of contacting, to continue to support ourselves in our practice, to make sense of what is emergent in the aesthetic of the present. Now I will suggest to you, there is a proper way of looking at this, humanistically, an advantage to this particular organism environment field, which I'm finding to be limited in the ways I've been saying. Limited to an emphasis on the biomechanical physical. To add to it something that is more humanistic. In the tradition of the most humanistic qualities of Gestalt therapy. Without dismissing environment, I want to say that clearly. Without dismissing this, and of course none of this is dismissing the holism of Gestalt therapy. And that difference, and that new term that I've been selling is everywhere I go, and I'm selling to you today. Hopefully, selling to you today is what is said called in English life world, and what is said in German is Lebenswelt, and what is referred to in Spanish is God, I can't remember Spanish. Whatever it is, the world of life, and in Italian is the world of life. So if you think of Lebenswelt as the world of life, I'm adding the world of life to environment. La vida,
El mundo de la vida.
Yeah, el mundo de la vida, and it's similarly in Italian.
It's like la vida.
La vida, because when I found that out when I was reading papers that Johnny and Rita wrote, where they were using life world, and I said, why aren't they saying life world? They're using the world of, it's translated from the Italian into English. Again, this is an example of the world of life.
Makes so much sense.
And it is, and that's
I just understood it.
right. That's where it comes from, because the tradition is from the life philosophy of late 19th century, early 20th century German philosophy of Wilhelm Dilthey. And what his reaction was to the scientism, the empiricism, that was beginning to dominate thinking. And he was saying that this kind of thought about human beings was too scientific. That it has to be a way to regain and maintain a way of respecting human personhood. So he introduced the idea of the Lebenswelt. Edmund Husserl, who is identified with phenomenology profoundly, used Lebenswelt and developed it in a significant way, and most significantly in his later works. And then other phenomenologists picked it up similarly and differently, Merleau-Ponty differently, but others differently, and sociologists differently. But so there are different definitions, but they all push out from this notion. So I'm not saying this is this definition, but all push out in this definition that this is what John Dewey, who's one of our sources, referred to as who objected to the organism environment, who said we have to think in terms of the more human plane. That we have to think of the environment as including the more human plane. And I'm suggesting that something like the life world is the more human plane. So when we're thinking about the organism environment field, we need to include a way of thinking about it and practicing within it that includes the more human plane. Because when we are therapists, when we are sitting as therapists, we are sitting in the midst of the more human plane. Now we do this anyway. We do this anyway. So what is the value of saying this if we do this anyway? Now that is a whole workshop. That is a whole semester and training program. That goes to the whole notion of what is the value of any of this. But I suggest that the value of this is how we can tighten all of the bolts in our training. How we can sharpen and maintain our sense of humanness as clinicians. And one of the angles of all of what I'm saying, all of this, is to sharpen our sense of the aesthetic of the present. It's to keep us, what is it? Anderson Cooper has this thing on CNN, keeping them honest. This is a way of keeping us humanly honest, so we don't lose track of the more human plane when we practice in terms of the organism environment field. And even most expansively, when I really take a hit off that coffee, I think of this as a term to really open us up into an ethical place when Gestalt therapy spreads out to look at the questions of the alien, questions of climate change, questions of where are we situated with regard to social change. Because if we can have a way in contacting, finding that the Zapotec culture in Montalban, we have a way of organizing ourselves ethically and responsibly in the more human plane. I don't find organism environment field inspiring in that direction. So that's that. That's that. Do you have any reaction to that?
It's a question.
Please.
I feel brave coming out because
You feel brave. I feel brave receiving your question.
Isn't the environment that which animates us?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can say that which animates us.
Mm-hmm.
And that which animates us, we're also resisting to feel ourselves okay.
Oh, yeah, because
That's so that which we are resisting is part of us. We are embedded in that which we resist.
And you can even go, you take that in all directions, because we're also resisting. We're also pushing against the past, present, and future.
Yes, that's all in the resisting. I just want to say, by resisting, I mean like in physics, coming up against.
Sure.
Because you don't feel yourself unless you do.
Right.
I just want to. Okay.
Right. What we're pushing off of and reaching towards is both a matter of gravity, as it is a matter of how we're organizing in terms of meaningful space.
And attraction.
Yeah, attraction. You know, and whatever attraction means, and that is in terms of the life world, because it's a place of meaning. I want. Let me see what I can do here. I'm not hopelessly jumping around, which is reassuring to me. You would know about that. And Ruella, what's important about what you just said is you're emphasizing how this is all one whole, and that there's nothing conceptual about any of this, merely conceptual. This is all like the beating of your heart. The heart beats of the life world. You know, when you felt your heart beating, you didn't just feel your heart beating, you felt your heart beating. We could do an entirely different experiment where you would feel the beating of the heart of the person next to you. And that would be a hell of an experiment. And what was the difference? It's obvious what the difference was, but what would come up? It would be a potentially eruptive experience of the other. Even though when you felt your own heart beating, you felt it in the context of others. So you can see how this can go in so many different directions. Now, is this an environment? Sure. But in life world, we're now creating the basis for the relational world. Yeah, we have an environment. It's there, just like the relational Gestalt therapy is in the original model. You know, and we can have paragraph to paragraph to paragraph in PhD and all that's written since establishing relational Gestalt therapy. But from my approach, this is nailing it down. Now, it's not just me doing this. You know, the others, the people across the pond. No, I don't mean across the divide, and analysts and self, they're also pulling this in. Not life world, they also use world, they use life space, and all things that are arguable different ways, but that's another topic. What's the proper word? And Heidegger used world, and it took me an hour before I mentioned the word Heidegger. Is that on the thing?
That's on it.
Bob Resnick once accused me of saying it 5 or 6 times, and I remember saying it once. I won't now, I may not today, put this all in terms, it's available in terms of the sequence of contacting. And if it's in terms of the sequence of contacting, it's in terms of self-functions. And if in terms of self-functions, they're often running in terms of our therapy. And it's also put this in terms of the aesthetic of the present, which is something that is very important. Do I have this? I'm gonna need these things. Yeah, you're just dropping with questions.
It's a kind of a comment. I hear what you're saying is very consistent with field theory. Are you still okay with that?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's organism, environment, life, world, field. And I don't, again, I don't know what field theory is. There are so many field theories. I mean, there's the Levinian field theory, and there are different field theories. Now, as far as I can find it, lots of different people use the word field consistently. And when people talk about field, they talk about force fields and things like that, I shrug my shoulders. When I'm thinking about field, I'm very close to the usage that my Italian friends use. In fact, I could be doing this in Italian, it would be perfect.
Yeah, no, I think it's simple enough to go back to.
Or French.
Carl Hodges used to, talk about the rock and everything, and experience, no, you don't get that, okay, the experience is about processes and events.
Yeah, I think that's fine, but it's fine, but it needs not to be.
No, it does, absolutely, in the sense that you're bringing it in, and that's what I was I'm curious about.
Right. It's not, it's fine, but it's still force field.
It's like,
okay.
Right.
I want to get to that. Because when I get to that, because when I talk about, the experience of time, yes.
Dan, I don't understand the expression aesthetics of the present.
Yes.
Would you help me?
I will. That's something that I take for granted. Sometimes we take for granted. What the whole word of aesthetic. Can I just check out others on this? We hear a lot about the aesthetic of contacting and things like that. I think there's an assumption that we all know what that means. And when I say it, this is what I mean. The beginning simply is that it's a form of sensed information from the original sense. But it's even more than that, because it's not merely the sensed, which would be the raw id function, but it is a organizing of knowledge. It's a form of knowing.
That's ego function.
It would be integrating. It's a form of knowing. If it's more, ego function would be more developing. Ego function would be including, would be with ego function would include more rationality.
Right. So, well, of course I know what aesthetics are, but I began to notice aesthetics of the present in writings such as from Margarita. And I never understood it. And so what you're saying to me is it's something that flows out of sensing.
Yes.
And is there more you can say?
Yeah. When you think about the forming of a figure, the early forming of a figure is a sensed forming. And that it's not merely a sense impression, but it contains within it a shape, a proto-shape.
Yes.
And that would be the aesthetic.
So, could you further help me by saying, what's the opposite?
Numb, blank, unformed.
And are you speaking about that which I, as an individual, am aware? And do I need to be aware of the aesthetics of the present for that experience to be the aesthetics of the present?
Yeah, it's the beginning of awareness. Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of the felt sense of the moment. Yeah. To take a step back, even historically in philosophy, in a very quick and dirty way, you have the notion of Descartes looking for what was irrefutable, what was clear and distinct, thinking.
Right.
And his contemporary Malebranche said, well, that wasn't quite right. What about the things that are unclear and indistinct? We also know things from that. So we can say that the aesthetic of the present would be what's unclear and indistinct, yet known.
And so in that this was not an expression used in our original literature, how did it come to be adapted, or what's the importance of it for you?
Yeah, part of what's that it does link in with the aesthetic of contacting, because it highlights the physicality and the sense physicality of contacting. It focuses on an aspect of what's happening in the emerging present of the therapy session, and what is available to both the therapist and the patient at the contact boundary. It is part of the experience of contact boundary phenomena, and it identifies the process, the forming process of figure grounding. If part of what we're doing in paying attention to the theory and paying attention to the phenomenon is to slow down what's happening, and if part of what we do when we're supervising is asking a patient, a trainee, or ourselves to slow down what's been going on in the session and to pay attention to what has been happening, we're slowing down to notice these emerging. And when we're slowing down in our descriptions, which we do when we talk about fore contact, blah, 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 we're slowing down. We're slowing it down even further. So now I jump ahead to another thing. When we slow down now to talk about such strange ideas as atmospheres and such strange ideas as what happens pre-fore contact, we've slowed it down to almost at the standstill.
And historically, are these notions things that began to be utilized and taught in the 90s? Before that?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
I don't know.
I know that when I was trained, these were not part of what we were talking about.
No.
So I'm curious to
I think
know.
it came out of a relational. Yeah.
Thanks for taking my question.
I think it came. I'm going to go to experiential, but I want to say one thing. Then I think that if you look at the history of Gestalt therapy in a certain way, you'll see what they call the terms.
Yeah.
The relational term, right. And then the ethical term, and then the aesthetic term. People are calling terms, which will only mean that people pay attention to this, people paying attention to that, people paying attention to this. And what is it? And what brings their attention here and there is there shifts in the larger world. I look at this. I see that. And now there's an ethical turn because the world out there has changed. Now there's potentially a pathic turn. Another topic.
Question. If it comes out, didn't Fritz sort of talk about this in a non-specific way when he talked about the fertile void and not going into polarities, just staying with what is?
Sure.
And he didn't talk about the kinesthesia of it, but he talked in not going into a polarity, you're left with the sensual experience.
Sure.
So I think it was hinted out for us to flesh out.
Sure, that's a good point. Yeah, and it reminds me of what they did
to just build on Susan's point, I think the word aesthetics started to be emphasized in the late 80s and 90s, but it's always been in PHG, and it's identified there. That's how we know what experience is. And even when we were training in practicums, Pat Kelly and others, we were taught to have an eye out for coherence of form.
Yeah.
And so when a person is speaking with you and they change the subject, or as Sylvia Crocker would say, she twisted her hair, that's an incoherence in the aesthetic form of presentness, a unified figure and shape of the person and how they're speaking and explaining, presenting themselves. So aesthetics was always there, and it's spelled out in the structure of growth as force of movement, vividness of color actually isn't mentioned, but it is, and how we see, hear, feel, all the senses operating, form an aesthetic sense that every individual has, like we have our pulse.
That's a little different. That's the aesthetic criterion.
Yeah.
That's a little different from the aesthetic of presence.
The aesthetic of presence.
A little different, but the aesthetic criterion is very important.
And well, we have an aesthetic of presence based on the aesthetic criteria. Force of movement, coherence, brightness, shape.
Right. They're different, but they're close. When I get to an experiment.
So just to kind of add to what Ruella was saying, this movement from the sterile void to the fertile void also has the sense of livingness. The sterile void is not being live, and also possibility of relational. So I think that was in there too.
Yeah.
There's something
fluid animations.
blooms, where something blooms, life comes in.
which relates to what you said about the aesthetic criterion, because the way in which we attend to things would be through the aesthetic criterion.
Can you say something about the difference, right? Because you're talking
Between
about
what?
the aesthetic criteria and the aesthetics of present.
Yeah, because one is a mode of evaluating contacting as it being present. The aesthetics of the present would be more of the without let's see my hands up like that. Without a it's more generic. It's more median.
Without a judgment or an assessment.
Without going through an evaluation. Without
Evaluation.
being part of the evaluating.
So can you say it's a pre-assessing?
It's more it's more free. The aesthetic criterion is certainly how it move along with it.
And
not a criterion. The aesthetic of present is not a criterion.
Yeah, you explained this also, Dan, in an email you wrote, that we have abstractions. So the aesthetic experiences I'm hearing you use it, it's just what we do. It's the actuality of our doing it. The criterion is an abstraction judging it.
Yeah.
So when I said force of movement, it's that's one way of judging it as opposed to my just doing it. And how you carry yourself, Susan, a wonderful aesthetic activity.
The process that you're describing, the aesthetic.
Yeah, well, they're all process. They're all process. They're all process. I want to. What I want to do is, if we can shift to putting this, maybe these things are always at the risk of turning into Titanic. Let's see what we can do. Is see if I can walk. Have a guided fantasy, and then see whether we can process this in terms of what we've been talking, and see if this holds any water. If you will.
I like what you said.
Are you willing to go through this?
I simply wanted to interrupt so briefly to say that I appreciated when you mentioned the fertile void, and that having been a referent to this same kind of experience that Dan is discussing now. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That was part of the Budapest thing.
It was part of the
Budapest conference. They addressed the creative indifference in the fertile void. It was a. Have you been on the list seeing the emails from Catherine? Her?
I got one email from
Yeah,
her.
she's been exploring that.
Yeah.
I'd like you to, if you can, willing, gather yourselves. In your chair. Breath. Any way you feel comfortable doing. Feel the ground under your feet. Do it too. Feel the hardness of the floor. It is hard. Your back. You lift one foot. Let it drop. That's fine. Get a sense of weight. Breath. Focus your breath, however it is you're breathing. Pay attention to the sounds of the room.
Please speak up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear the sounds of the room? Can you hear the sounds, distant sounds? Reach out to them with your hearing. Bring your hearing closer if you can. Can you hear sounds in the room? Can you imagine, remember this room? Now, where are you? What's it like for you to be here? What's that experience like? Does it have a feeling? A sense? How about this building? Can you be in this building? Can you expand to this neighborhood? Remember it? How you know it? Bring yourself to it and it to you. What comes up for you? What is this like? Expand as far as you like. Cover as much territory as you feel like you can or will. Go where you want, or not. And what it's like for you to be doing this. Take your body with you. back here. Bring yourself to sense of this room, what you hear, what you sense. Who's here? What has it been like for you to be here today with them, with each other? Who's not here? Who's not here? Who's not here? Can you find a place for somebody who's not here? Is there room? Choice point. Are you back from that experiment? I'm at a choice point. I'm either like to discuss this in small groups of 5 or in a larger group and then talk about it. My inclination is the small group. We're always saying no. What do you think?
Small.
Okay. Break into a small group and talk about it for a while and talk about it. Okay?
Discuss our experience.
Yeah, talk about your experience.